Amen. Okay, in the name of Lord Jesus Christ, we start our class on 2 Thessalonians. Let's sing hymn 199. Boy. Please be seated. So, I'd like to ask, have you read 2 Thessalonians yet? No. Okay, let's turn to it. Well, if we're going to talk about it, right? We have to first read it. Okay? So, there are 12 verses each. 12 verses in that chapter, so why don't we everybody read one verse, loud and clear, okay? Let's see, we have 6 sisters, read the first 6 verses, one each, okay? And the 6 brothers here, read the rest of 6 verses, one each, okay? Starting with left. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 1. Please read it because I'm going to ask you questions. Okay, verse 2. Verse 3. Verse 4. Verse 6. Mm-hmm. 7. Okay. Let me introduce you briefly about this Second Thessalonian. Okay. First, the author is, we all know, is Paul. Okay. I anticipate you will be writing it because it's basic. Second, when did Paul write it? When? Let's say from, okay, wait, let's say from, okay, let's say within 1.5 years after Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians. Okay? People say it's about around 51 AD. Now, let me explain this, okay? Why this is important. In your RE class, I'm sure you have studied Paul's missionary trip. Have you? Yes, right? Now, do you remember in which missionary trip Paul established the church in Thessalonica? Forgot? Okay. It's in second missionary trip. In second missionary trip, Paul preached the gospel to Europe. Okay. First time, it was basically in Turkey. But second time, he crossed from Turkey, from Troas, into Macedonia. Okay. And that's Paul's second missionary trip is recorded in Acts chapter 16 to chapter 18. Now, are you familiar with it? No, right? Okay. Basically, if you look at Acts chapter 16 and 17, you can see that Paul first preached the gospel to Philippi. And Paul only stayed there for a couple weeks. And then in Philippi, he was persecuted. So Paul, Silas, and Timothy fled to Thessalonica. Now, in your passage, it says Silvanus. Who's Silvanus? Silvanus is Silas. Okay, Silas is a short form of Silvanus. Does that make sense to you? Okay, it's just like Robert. Okay, what's a short form of Robert? Bob, right? Same thing with, yes. If you look at, if you read 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, verse 1, it's Silvanus. But in book of Acts, let's say in chapter 18, verse 1, verse 5, it mentions Silas. Basically, I'm trying to tell you, it's the same person. Okay? Now, so I try to explain to you why is it that, how we know Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians, basically within 1.5 years after he wrote 1 Thessalonica, is because that first, Paul preached gospel to Philippi a couple weeks, then in Thessalonica. And in Thessalonica, he was persecuted, so he left the place and he went to Berea. Okay? And he was there Berea for a couple weeks too. And then he was persecuted, so he went to Athens. But Paul and Silas stayed in Berea and Thessalonica. Are you following? And then Paul stayed in Athens for a couple weeks. He went to Corinth. And in Acts chapter 18, verse 5, it mentioned that Paul stayed in Corinth for, in verse 11, Acts chapter 18, verse 11, it mentioned Paul stayed in Corinth for 1.5 years. Okay? And in Acts chapter 18, verse 5, it mentioned Silas and Timothy arrived in Corinth and met with Paul because they came from Macedonia. Macedonia is where Philippi and Thessalonica, the city, located. Okay? So, Silas only traveled with Paul in second missionary trip. Only second missionary trip. Silas did not travel with Paul in third or fourth, nor first. Okay, and so how we can deduce that when Paul said in verse 1, chapter 1, verse 1, said Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy, right? So they were all together saying greeting to the believer in Thessalonica. And when did Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians? Where? It's actually in Corinth. Right. I think we better turn to that passage. Just you have some memories, okay? You thought probably I made this up, okay? Let's turn to Acts chapter 18. Look at verse 1. Acts chapter 18, verse 1. Okay? Okay, somebody read that, please. Acts chapter 18, verse 1. Yes, please. Thank you.
After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth.
Okay. Verse 5, please.
Verse 5, when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ.
Please also verse 11.
11, and he counted there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them.
Okay. So, Paul, Timothy, and Silas were all together in Corinth for 1.5 years. Okay? And when Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians is in Acts chapter 18, verse 5. When Silas and Timothy came back and reported to Paul what happened in Thessalonica, the believer there still believe. Okay? And so that's when he wrote the 1 Thessalonians. Chapter 1 to chapter 3 mention how Paul felt when he departed from the believers in Thessalonica, and how he longed for them, he concerned for them, and he sent Timothy and Silas to follow up. Now they came back and reported to Paul what happened to them, you see? So that's Acts chapter 18, verse 5. Okay, when they just returned to Corinth and tell Paul about it, okay? So when that 1.5 years, Paul wrote again, 2 Thessalonians. Okay, now, this is the background of 2 Thessalonians, okay? Let's talk about the first. You finish this? Can I erase this? Okay. Let's write numeral number 1. Verse 1 to 12. And can you write continuation of persecution that believers endure? Okay, okay. Section 1 is 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Okay? Well, what's this chapter 1 about? Continuation of persecution. That believers endure. Right. Now, from the first letter that Paul wrote, the believers in Thessalonica already suffered persecution. But the persecution lasted longer than people had anticipated. It probably didn't last for a couple of weeks. When they persecuted Paul, Paul left, but the Jews still continued to persecute the believers in Thessalonica. And so Paul wrote 1 Thessalonians, okay? But then the persecution continues. So Paul had to address the continuation of the persecution that the believers in Thessalonica encounter, you see? So verse 1 to verse 2, okay? It's a greeting and the benediction. Okay, those are very simple, so we're not going to talk about it. Okay, but we are talk about who greeted the church. Okay, B, verse 3 to verse 4 is the thanksgiving of Paul. Thanksgiving. Now, what? I don't want to write everything. What did Paul give thanks for? Can somebody tell me? What did Paul give thanks for? I mean, when I write what, and this is Thanksgiving, right? So we're supposed to link it together. Okay? What did Paul give thanks for? Verse 3 and 4. What did Paul give thanks for? Yes. Huh? The faith has been growing. Good. Let me ask you a question. Next one. How did Paul know that their faith grows? I mean, can you see the faith grows? How did Paul know that their faith grows? Yes. I'm sorry? Louder? Uh-huh. Persecution, right, in verse 4. That they endure the persecution for a long time. Okay? So, very good. So all you have to do is read the context. It's not that hard, right? My question is always based on context. What else? What else did Paul give thanks for besides their faith? And what? That's it? Their faith? I know you can do better. What does verse 3 say? Huh? Patient? That's verse 4. I said verse 3. Love? Yes, love. Okay. How did Paul know that their love grow for each other or increase for each other? Well, love is something you can see, right? If people love each other, you can see. But faith is by persecution, okay? How they still hold on to their faith, okay? Now, and because they are so good that Paul even boasted about among the churches how good these believers in Thessalonica, their faith, their love, okay? Because their patience and their faith in persecutions. Okay? So this is what Paul gave thanks for. Now, next question is, how does it apply to us today? How does it apply to us? How does it apply to us today? Paul's thanksgiving. For example, if you know your friend being persecuted, what will you think of that person? Oh, you're so pitiful. Are you okay? Right? Or maybe you can say to a friend, just forsake your faith, Why suffer for it, right? Give up your faith. You don't have to suffer. Don't be stupid, right? That's something you can say. But Paul didn't say that. What did Paul see? He see the good in the persecution, that believers still stand firm because of their faith. Okay? And you know what? In the time when you're being persecuted, if you look at the negative things in persecution, you suffer. I suffer. What a bummer, Why I'm so stupid to suffer this. Okay. Oh, this person mistreated me. Okay. I feel so bad. And you ask, where's God? You know what happened to your faith? You'll collapse. It's like people outside attacking you, and yourself attacking yourself inside. Okay? And then your faith will collapse. And for Paul, that's not how he looked at it. Okay? And this is, how a child look at things and how adults look at things is different, right? And adults look at things are more mature, more complete, right, supposedly, okay, than the kids. Okay, kids only look at what's ahead of them, let's say. And sometimes we are just like the kids in spirituality. We look at suffering, we look at what's only immediate. We don't look beyond that, okay? So, brother, sister, if you see people suffering, okay, look deeper, okay, look inside. And if they're able to stand firm, we need to give thanks to God, okay, and encourage them that I'm happy for you. I'm proud of you, that you stand firm in your faith in a time of persecution, okay? So Thanksgiving really helps, okay? Can you give thanks in the time of tribulation, persecution? Okay. If you cannot give thanks, very likely your faith is going down even further because you'll be complaining. It doesn't really help, okay? And what God gave us tribulation? Because he loves us. There's something need to be learned, okay? For example, in school, do you like to do homework? No, right? Usually we don't like to do homework. But what happens when you do homework? You learn something, doesn't it? Right? No? Okay. Well, supposedly, you do homework, you're supposed to learn something. At least practice makes perfect. Practice makes you faster doing solving certain problems. Generally speaking, okay? I'm not talking about, I don't know, special cases. Right. Agree? Now, homework is supposed to help you to learn something. If you're hearing it, but you don't practice it, it won't stick. For example, I always have this experience. If people give me a secret recipe, delicious dishes recipe, okay? If I don't cook it myself, if I don't do it, I just hear it. Oh, recipe go like this and how you do it. I said, yeah, I got it. But you know what? After a year, I forgot. Well, wait until you're getting old. You discover your memory is not as good as before. It's called aging, okay? You haven't experienced it because right now your brain is very good, okay? But believe me, it will deteriorate. It's just like you see people getting weaker and weaker, skinnier, and they will walk slower and slower, and your hair will turn white. You will be like that one day, okay? Do you see? Just like before I was like you, black hair, lots of hair. Now I'm white and bald, a little bit. And when people see me, if they haven't seen me for a while, they always say, what happened, Jason? You're getting bolder. Yes, I know. Not that I want to. Okay, so come back to the question. What do we talk about that? The aging. The cooking. So I had to cook. Once I cook it impressed upon me. I don't need a recipe. I can cook it without recipe. Okay? You see, you had to practice it. Okay. Same thing with homework. That's why just think about tribulation, persecution, is God giving you homeworks. Okay. Next one. This is what we need to discuss, the most important in chapter 1, is verse 5 to verse 10. The manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God. Okay. The manifest evidence of righteous judgment of God is actually quoted from verse 5. Verse 5 is like a topic sentence from verse 5 to verse 10. Now, the question I will ask you is, number one, what is? I don't want to write everything again. What? What is the manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God? Can somebody tell me? Don't look at others. Look at Bible. I like to know the answer. This is teach you how to read the Bible, okay? You'll be amazed, okay? That oftentimes we read the Bible, it doesn't mean we know what we're reading, okay? What is the righteous judgment? Well, what is the manifest evidence of righteous judgment of God? Volunteer, please. This is simple. Can I call on you guys? No. Volunteer, brother. Yes, Oscar, right? Yes, that they endure. Okay? That's in verse 4. Okay? Verse 5 says, which is, right? Which refer to the phrase before that, right? Before which, correct? That's how you figure it out, right? Good. Now, second question, why? Why the persecution and the tribulation that they endure is the manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God. Do you see? When Paul said that, right? That the persecution and the tribulation that they endure is the manifest evidence of righteous judgment of God. Why? Does that make sense to you? When Paul said, the tribulation and persecution that you endure is a manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God. Does it make sense to you? Do you understand what you're reading? Do you know what Paul is talking about? Think. Why? Okay. We know what's the evidence, right? And this evidence has been manifested. So Paul said, manifest evidence of what? God's righteous judgment. God's righteous judgment. And you say, what? Why am I suffering? Is an evidence that God is righteous, basically. Does it make sense to you? Yeah? Okay, good. Can you explain to us?
Wait, what's the question?
Why the persecution and tribulation they endure is the manifest evidence of the righteous judgment of God. So that we can become worthy of the kingdom of God. That's verse 11. Oh, verse 5. Right. No, verse 11 too, sorry. May become worthy. Let's see. That's what verse 5 says, huh? Well, actually, the answer is verse 6 to 10. Why? If verse 6 to 10. Okay, let me give you an analogy. Okay, let me tell you what verse 6 to verse 10 is saying related to verse 5. Okay? Paul is basically saying that your suffering, let's say, imagine you're the believer in Thessalonica. Okay? Paul is saying your suffering is an evidence of God's righteous judgment, because in verse 6 to verse 10, it's basically saying that these people will be punished and you will be rewarded. Let me give you an analogy, okay? Suppose last period, let's see, I'm sorry? Okay. No, okay, Pastor Zhen. No, yeah, right. I'm not thinking about Pastor Zhen. Let's see. Let me call. Let's say I'm looking at the name here. Okay, let's say Kenneth, okay? Kenneth, last period, have a $100 bill on his seat, okay? And then, this period, he came back. The $100 bill disappeared. It's gone, okay? I'm just using an analogy, okay? The $100 bill disappeared, okay? And the $100 bill disappeared is an evidence of somebody been taking it, right? Or even stealing it. Agree? Do you see? It's evidence, a manifest evidence of somebody stealing it. You see? And I continue to say, since somebody's stealing it, that person will definitely either be punished by God or by people or by both. Agree? Do you see? It's evidence, right? Since it's missing, someone's stealing it, and therefore that person will be punished, right? And if I had a faith, I would say the $100 will be found and returned to Kenneth. Does that make sense to you? Okay, so let's go back to that. Paul is saying, since you are suffering, right? Since believers in Thessalonians have been suffering in persecution, what does it say? These people, right, who persecuted believers will be what? Punished. Why? Because God is just. Do you see? So your suffering is evidence, what? That these people will be punished. The evidence of God's righteous judgment, that these people will be punished, you see? And you'll be rewarded because you suffer for Jesus' sake. Does that make sense to you now? Makes sense, right? Okay. So, number 3, how? How does it apply to us? How does it apply to us? I don't want to write everything, so I just write how. You're supposed to write how does it apply to us? Okay. How does it apply to us? Anybody? Based on what we have learned. So today, let's say if you are being persecuted, and you can tell you suffer is not because you do something wrong, because you do what you're supposed to do. And some people just give you some kind of false reasons to persecute you. Okay? You can tell it's not your fault. Okay? How will you feel? How will you feel if it's not your fault? Huh? You feel bad? Well, I wouldn't. Why? For example, if I've been persecuted, some people speak bad about me for something I don't say. Okay? Well, first, from what we have learned here, since I've been attacked or slandered, okay, this is a manifest evidence of God's righteous judgment. That what? That person will be punished because that person speak or do something that is not right. Correct? And what? And for me, I'll be rewarded. Why? Because I suffer for his sake. You don't need to pity for me because I believe God's just. Okay? I know that person will be punished. I will be rewarded. So what do you feel sad for me if I'm rewarded? Does it make sense to you? But the thing is, if you don't believe you'll be rewarded, you feel, I'm so sad. God's not fair. God does not see. God does not care. No, God cares. God knows everything. Okay? So that's how it applies to us. So today, when you suffer, your suffering, if you suffer for Jesus' sake, your suffering is an evidence of God's righteous judgment. Okay? This is what we need to think. Okay, next, number 4. How can we have such a faith? How can we have faith like believers in Thessalonica? Sorry, I don't want to write everything. How can we have faith like believers in Thessalonica? That's a question that we need to ask. It's not that hard. Look at the Bible, verse 5 to 10. How did they have such a faith? They've been persecuted, right? They endure, even for 1.5 years, they say. They're still enduring. They didn't give up. Their faith is great. Okay? Paul boasted their faith among the churches. How did they have such a faith? What did they believe? Just ask you, what do they believe? If you look at it, they just believe that, what? God will punish the wicked and reward the righteous. That's it. That's our 10th basic belief. The 10th basic belief says Jesus will come again. When he comes, he will judge the people. The wicked shall be punished with eternal fire, and the righteous will go to heaven, right? That's a simple statement. But when we believe it, I tell you, it will become very powerful. It will give you strength. It will give you peace in the time of persecution. But next one is number 5. What if? What if we don't have the 10th basic belief? Let's say you don't believe it, that God is righteous. You don't believe that God will punish the wicked and reward the righteous. What will happen to you if you don't believe it? I see that all the times in church. Have you heard about people say, God's not fair? How come this person, oppressed me and he or she's laughing at me, and God does not punch them or whip them or kill them or something? Okay? Some people think like that. Okay? How come God does not do anything about it, right? As a result, what do? I will revenge myself. I do it my way, right? That's one. What else do people do the other way? I give up on God. God's not fair. I don't want to believe in him, right? I don't want to come to church anymore, right? So there's two things. Now, how come God does not punish you right away? That's not hard to answer, right? Have we done wrong before? Of course, right? Do you want God to, you did something wrong, kill you on the spot? No, right? You're hoping that God would give you some time for you to repent, right, before he punishes you. Same thing, God's giving time for other people to repent too. Okay? So, this is how we're supposed to read the Bible, asking questions, what, why, and how. And this is how we're supposed to learn so that we can have faith. And having great faith is not that difficult. Just believe the 10th basic belief. Okay? God is righteous. God's just. He'll punish eventually. Okay? Let's not lose faith. If we have that faith, we can endure. Okay? Last one. Number D. D, verse 11 to 12. It's Paul's prayer. Okay? Paul's prayer. What did Paul pray for? If we read the text, right, it's that God may count them worthy. Okay? But you have to read between the lines. What is God really saying? What Paul is really saying? Paul is really saying that he hopes that believers can live a life worthy of God's calling. If they live a worthy life of God's calling, God will consider them worthy. If they don't live a life worthy of God's calling, he prayed that God will consider them worthy. It's not going to happen. Okay? So in a time of persecution, we still need to continue to live up to God, what God expects from us. If we are the chosen people of God, the prince of God, we need to live up to that kind of standard. Okay? Sorry, time's up. Let's conclude. It's prayer time. How is somebody leading it, or I'm leading it, or I'm leading it? Okay. How many do you guys pray? Huh? I cannot hear you. Louder. 10 minutes. Okay. No need for encouragement, right? Just kneel down, pray. Okay. So, brother and sister, please, do they come up? Counselors, do they come up? Or just kneel down? Okay. So, brother and sister, we're going to pray for 10 minutes. Okay, let's ask God to continue to guide us and bless us. Okay.